What the essence of reality about is that we are all our own authority, that we are the author of our lives, and there is no external being that saves us or that pre-plans anything for us, but that everything that emanates from us comes from deep inside at the level of the subconscious mind. I was in a corporate situation. I'd had a corporate executive that we had had words, we were not happy with each other, and another person who was on my same level, not happy with each other, and it was a hostile environment. I looked at the end of the conference table, and there was this two people that I'd had these discussions with that were not pleasant, and they were glowing. And I looked down at the table, and it took my breath away because they were so beautiful. And I'll start crying because I just felt this incredible warmth all over myself, all over the room. It was amazing love. Later that night in my hotel room, I started thinking about, what happened? Because I thought I had had a heart attack. And I look at it now and I think I did have a heart attack, but it was a different kind of heart attack. What I learned was they were not their personalities, and I knew that they, at their core being, they were beautiful light.
Souljourns first caught up with Candace Tanner when she was a serious student of yoga philosophy, studying at an ashram in Fort Walton Beach, Florida. As she moved on with her life, she discovered the teachings of the book Essence of Reality, which has significantly deepened her spiritual path. Welcome to Souljourns, and to the story of Candace Tanner. This interview was recorded in Coronado, California, in October of 2015. Candace, thanks for this. This is October 24th, 2015. And you mentioned a book I'd like you to talk about because it's apparently had somewhat of an impact in your life, and what always intrigues me is what you said afterwards. It might not be everybody's cup of tea.
Right.
So talk about that.
Okay. Well, the book is called Essence of Reality by Thomas Nehrer, and it's spelled N-E-H-R-E-R. I came across the book, there's no accidents, but I came across the book on the floor of my office. And it was interesting how it got there. I was selling some things online, and someone had donated it to me or not donated, but given it to me to sell. And so I just picked it up and started reading it one day. And I never do that because I always sell the books. I never save them for myself. I read it, and it changed my life. It did, in many ways. And what the essence of reality about is that we are all our own authority, that we are the author of our lives, and there is no external being that saves us or that pre-plans anything for us, but that everything that emanates from us comes from deep inside, and it comes in from deep inside at the level of the subconscious mind.
How did you greet that discovery when you first read those lines that said what you just told me?
I loved it. I immediately identified with it.
Would you have been ready for this 10, 15 years ago?
No, definitely not. And not even maybe a year earlier.
And just very briefly, because we'll get back to this part later, what happened in the last year or two or three that made you so open to receive this?
I had been studying quite closely, as you may recall, yoga. Yoga philosophy, and I enjoyed yoga philosophy. I felt that it also changed my life. But I saw that there was a winding down to some knowledge that I had acquired. Not a winding down, that's not a good word. It's more like time to expand. And I saw that there were some limitations to what I was studying, even though it was quite beautiful, and I'll always love the tradition. I'll always love the yoga tradition, but I saw that it was a time for me to knock some of the barriers down that were holding me in place. And so I welcomed the book. I welcomed the material in the book.
It was like the book was just waiting for you to discover it.
Waiting for me. absolutely waiting for me to discover it. So I read it, and I said, I'm giving my power away. I can see that I'm giving my power away to a tradition that's not a bad thing, but it's not a match for me anymore. It's time for me to move on. And so I started thinking about what that would look like to move on. And I felt a little bit intimidated by the process because I was so comfortable in what I was doing, and it was going to mean that I had to come outside and do something else and move away from a pretty intense study of yoga.
And your intense study is where I met you a number of years ago.
Yes.
In Fort Walton Beach, Florida.
Correct.
In the ashram of a Swami who was
Yes.
expert in
Yes.
this lineage.
A brilliant man.
Yeah.
A brilliant man.
And you just soaked it up.
I soaked it up. I was there probably 4 days a week anyway.
For several years.
For years, 5
Yeah.
years, yeah.
So this is a big demarcation
It's a big
for
one.
you.
Yeah, it was. It was. But I could see that it was something I needed to do. It was time to move on. So I did.
So where are you now? Where
Well,
did you move on to?
Well, I read the book, and I read the second book that Thomas Nehrer wrote. Then I read the third book that he wrote, and he's only got 3. And then I realized I didn't need to read any books at all, that I already had the knowledge within myself. And it gave me such a feeling of liberation and self-confidence like I've never had in my whole life.
Do I have this right? He was a teacher and a guide and an author whose lesson to you was you don't need a teacher or a guide
Correct.
or an author.
That's correct. And in fact, if you read his books, he says that it's almost like, don't bother me. You know, I'm happy to share this information with you. You can do with it what you choose. I am not a guru, and I don't want you knocking on my door asking me to be your guru.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not what I do. So here it is for you if you want it.
That's a pretty remarkable
It's a pretty
discovery.
remarkable, yeah. And because he understands that he's the authority of his life, some people would read his work and consider him arrogant. And he says that. He
Well,
said,
it speaks of arrogance just
Yeah.
to suggest such a
to
thing.
suggest that because in our culture, it's not popular to think that we are our own authority.
Mm-hmm.
It's not popular to think that there's not an external being to whom we owe our allegiance, that there is an external being who takes care of us. That's common. I mean, most people think that way through traditions and religions. So whatever or whomever you call your God is to whom you give your allegiance.
Mm-hmm.
And in essence of reality, you see that you're giving your total power away to some external being that probably isn't even there. This is hard to say because I see so many educated people and people who don't have formal education, both, but they subscribe to this same idea that there's this external being who is all-powerful. Mm-hmm. I no longer see it that way.
An important figure in our life, and this isn't to redirect the conversation or to persuade anybody who doesn't want to be persuaded.
Oh, definitely
But
not.
a Swami would say, yes, I am God, but you are God also. The only difference between me and you is that you don't realize
You're not aware of it.
that you are the eternal light. You are the
Yes.
eternal awareness.
Right. That is so true. You're just not aware of it. You're not at a level of awareness where you can comprehend that.
But in practical terms, you have a sick aunt and she's not doing well, and you want to help her with your thoughts, your energy, your love, and maybe your prayers. And so you turn to God. Do you say now, rather than turning outward to what may or may not be out there, God, you turn inward to God?
That's correct. That's right.
Is that a fair way to put it?
Yes, that's a very fair way to put it, yes. Right. I mean, I see that everything emanates from within myself. I'm the center of my own universe. I know that sounds really arrogant, but it's not. There's so much freedom in it. There's nobody to blame. I am 100% responsible for my experience in this life. It shows up in my quality of my relationships. It shows up in the quality of where I live, of my interactions with everyone I come in contact with. It's a totally freeing way of looking at life and a perspective that makes me not so fearful, because I think we have, as human beings, we have a built-in fear level.
Jody has a question.
Oh, Candace, I was wondering if the author experienced this power within. I'm calling it that. I don't know what he calls it. Or did he reason to it?
I believe he had some experiences. Yes, he talks about he had some experiences. He doesn't make it like the focal point of the conversation at all, but he does say that he has.
It seems to me that in most wisdom traditions, this is the mystical basis of it, but is often ignored and called by many different names.
Yes, yes, it is.
Why didn't you find this in the tradition you have been pursuing 4 days a week for 4 or 5 years, where it was all about the Eastern concept, as far as I can recall, of Advaita, of non-duality, of there is only God. And if you're aware, that means the only object that's of your awareness is your God self. Mm-hmm. You never saw it that way, or it was never taught that way?
I wasn't ready. I just wasn't ready to see it.
So that was part of the foundation that needed to be built for you to be.
Big foundation of it. I love yoga tradition.
You may not have joined a yoga tradition had you known
Right.
that was.
Right, but I very much loved it. And I see everything that I studied, because I've been on a spiritual quest since I was in my 30s anyway, probably before that, and I saw everything that I had studied as building block up to this moment.
Well, that's why we wanted to talk to you, because we both heard your story before about the trials, tribulation, and travail running simultaneously on the same path as your spiritual pursuit. It's like one has to give her the other. So give us, if you will, one more practical illustration of how this newfound understanding works in day-to-day life. Okay. A flat tire. James is cranky and doesn't want to go out to dinner, or whatever it might be.
I see everything, even including an illness, as coming from my subconscious mind. And I see that everything is due to my own programming or conditioning that's deep within me. And as that is layered on throughout the years, I see that as a veil to understanding our own essence, that is a blockage, that the conditioning that we go throughout life from when we're born, and we're first told, no, we can't do something, and it becomes, we have an impetus to move outward, we have an impetus to love, and we have an impetus to express. And as a child, we're all stifled immediately. We're told no, no, and a lot of it's good and well-intended, because they're protecting your physical body, right? Yeah. But we're just thwarted in our efforts to express ourselves.
Or you don't want to hurt your, maybe at that time, a religious upbringing where the catechism says this is the one and only acceptable answer.
There's
to the
no
question
other frame
you're
of
asking.
reference, so you don't know. You're innocent, and it's conditioning. And so all of that just keeps getting layered on and on throughout the years. You just keep adding more and more to it. And pretty soon that veil gets so thick that you're totally conflicted. You know, you want something inside, but all this conditioning in between distorts it. And it either can't come out, your manifestation can't come out through that thickness, that goo, or those structured boxes cleanly and clearly. It just can't come out. It comes out distorted.
It's like an accumulation of tar.
Yeah.
In a city that can't afford to pour good concrete or asphalt, so you have to strip away all those layers.
Yeah, yeah.
I had written this question, I'm not sure it's appropriate right now, but do you feel that this truth is the ultimate truth, that we are all destined to realize?
I think we're all moving toward it in some way. Most people just don't realize they are. Most people are out seeking the capital S self without having a clue in their lifetime what's going on. And so they're just going around experiencing life on autopilot, driven by this conditioning. And it's deep.
Well, it all comes incrementally. I know for years I was one of those people out seeking the capital S self, or as our friend Phyllis Crystal says, the high C, the higher consciousness, without really knowing a clue about what that meant.
Right.
So, do you feel alone? Do you have a study group? Do you have friends now you're acquiring?
I'm not alone in this at all. It was interesting how it played out, because as soon as I read the book, I realized it was for me, and then I was nervous about giving it to friends, because he's so bold in his claim that you are the authority of your life. There is no external source. And I was nervous about giving that book to anybody else. So I gave it to a friend of mine. I tested it out on him, and he loved it. Mm-hmm. He read it. He immediately resonated with him. I gave it to my next friend, and she read it, and she completely agreed with it. I gave it to another friend who said, not for me.
Sure.
You know. And finally, James understood it and liked it, and started getting into it as well.
That's great.
And so now we have a group of 6 to 8 people who meet every other week to discuss.
My feeling is we get people who write us from all over the world. The people I expect might like this, and we know them and might read it or listen to it, almost never respond. But the people I've never heard of before call and say, how can I get more information? If anybody wants, I wouldn't give your email address, but they could write me and I could pass along, and you could use your discretion about helping people better understand what this is about.
Yeah.
So it would seem that this has enhanced your life.
Very much so.
Made you a lot more peaceful, a lot less fearful.
And a lot more self-confident.
Oh, that's wonderful, capital S.
Yes. And I still see the fear. You know, it's not like it's all gone. It's not disappeared. But I see it as the survival instinct. You know, to me, we're born with those 4 primitive fountains: food, sex, sleep, and self-preservation, of which self-preservation is the strongest. I believe we have an obligation to take care of the physical apparatus. I believe that it is that we're duty bound to take care of this. This manifested out from the mind, from our own mind, from internal to external, and now I have an obligation to it. It's not separate from me. It is me. It's all one
Jody's
thing.
word is we're in training. I used to always say we're in school, and the class doesn't end until the last breath, and then it continues in the next realm beyond that. So extend this realm as long as we know how to do it.
Yes.
Because we have unique lessons, perhaps, that only come in this realm.
Right. Something to learn, something to do, somebody maybe else to assist. There's many, many reasons that we're here. I see that we're here to mostly to manifest according to our own desires.
Whoa. Did this mind, as you call it, exist before the body? And
Yes.
manifest the body,
Yes.
that's what you're saying.
Yes.
And will it exist after the body?
Yes.
In other words, it
Yes.
probably didn't have a beginning, or will it have an
It
end?
never.
So we're using the word mind as a euphemism for an even higher power.
Yes.
You might say.
It is. It is. And from yoga studies, you know, when you study yoga, we looked at it as the causal plane, the subtle plane, and the gross plane. And so the way I personally see it is that all this conditioning, sometimes in yoga terms it's called samskaras, reside at this causal level, or where the akashic, you hear about the akashic records are. It lives there, but most of the time it's latent, and then something internally or externally triggers it. It starts to move outward. It comes out through the subtle plane where the dreams are, and then it comes eventually out into the gross. And I say it sounds like it's happening incrementally. It's really not. That's just an organized way for the mind to explain it. One of the things that's interesting about this, because after I started the Thomas Nehrer study, I started thinking of myself as a non-dualist. So I would think about, this is all one singularity. that there's only separation because of the way the mind operates. It separates you from me, so I perceive that you're sitting over there across the room from me, Jody. But really, it's not. It's all this one singularity that's moving together. Then I started reading deeper into the work, and I realized that even by labeling it as non-dual, it was still a label.
Yeah, you have to move way beyond all that.
So you have to move way beyond all that. And that was another big piece of the awakening to this, was I could no longer go, because I was kind of smugly saying, oh, well, I'm a non-dualist now. I get it. I'm no longer, I can't say the words, I'm no longer what I used to think I was. I'm a non-dualist now. But even that's not right.
That's a category.
Even that's categorization.
You yourself in the infinity that way, I think.
Yep.
Yeah.
But the mind likes it. The mind, the intellect, let me call it the intellect likes categorization. The intellect likes neat little ways to tie things up and boxes to put things in.
When I first became familiar, I would say to myself over and over, well, it's a dream in which there are 7 billion others sharing this little space called Earth. Are they all, am I a figment in those individuals' dreams, or are they all figments in my dream?
Yeah.
But that can just spiral down to total craziness. And I think what you just expressed says it so well.
Well, and I think there are others here having experiences. I do. I think that I draw them in to me based on the totality of my mindset in the moment.
Yeah.
Any relationship, anything I experience is like a snapshot of the meaning and the value that's held within my own mind at the moment.
So my question to you is it more correct to say, just as you said, so I draw them in, or is it more correct to say, so I create them to be additional aids to carry my thought pattern further?
Both, but
Okay.
mostly I see that in that particular moment, my mind is aligned in one way or the other, and so I'm a match at the moment for someone or some situation. Yeah.
Part 2 of who Candace is.
It's like,
I think I call them type A personalities. You can use your own definition. I know this because we've talked about it. You don't mind me asking you about the former life you lived.
yeah.
And I'm going to use the word business place tyrant, because you were strong, and I can see that didn't cause you any happiness.
It didn't cause me any disdain.
But you were a pistol. You were a pill. You were a person of a different stripe years ago, and
yes.
that all has gone.
Yes.
Do you mind talking about a little bit of that?
No, I don't. I think what it is, Ted, it's more like when we're focused on something and nothing gets in the way, then there's no conflict, right? So I knew what I wanted to do pretty much all along as I was going through my corporate career.
And you were a corporate executive?
No, I wouldn't say executive, high-level executive, but, say...
You had power, control, and influence.
Yes, I had sales teams. And,
okay, you were an executive.
Kind of thing, yeah.
That's right. You were head of a sales team, and you had duties and responsibilities and expectations.
Right. Okay. But I don't want to leave the impression that I planned this all those years. I didn't. But it was back in the time in the 80s when women were coming into the workplace, and I could see that there were people making money, and I wasn't one of them. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to be one of them, and I wanted to have a career. And I started out as a clerk typist at a major corporation in 1969, and clawed my way up the corporate ladder. Just classic.
The path people took who lived in America.
Yeah.
It wasn't the class system, but it was a capability system.
Yes.
If you could show the capabilities.
And it was so exciting because it was the first time that women really had an opportunity to do something with themselves. And while there was a lot of conflict along the way and a lot of barriers that had to be broken, it was doable. And I have always been grateful that I was born in the United States,
Sure.
that I was born in the time when I was born, because this opportunity started coming up for me, and I would see the opportunities and I'd grab them. I would saw that this company had a whole program, an engineering program, where I could go to college and get a degree, and they would pay for 90% of it to a prestigious school.
So the system worked for you.
The system worked beautifully for me because I would see it was first of all, I saw it was a system. I could detach myself enough to see it was a system. It was a game. It was like the game afoot.
Yeah.
And I could see, once I could see the mechanism, I could understand how to navigate it and make it work.
And without making a judgment, for many, 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 many people, that system, that game just continues until they either retire or drop over, which was what we were probably all modeled to do, is probably taught for us to do that.
Yes, it was the normal.
Yeah, and then to retire to a life of fishing, cocktails, and
golf.
Golf, yeah.
Yes.
And that's all fun, and people have fulfilling lives, and they watch their football games, and I watch my football games. I mean, I'm really trying hard. There is no judgment there.
Yeah.
So since that's the case, how did you break free from that mindset, that game, that puzzle, to move into a whole different realm, which might be the polar opposite of the one you grew to be comfortable and successful in?
Well, I didn't sit down and plan it, but I took official retirement from the company I was working with. And about those same time, I knew that I was pretty unhappy and that I needed to do some things in my life to change and to be in a happier place.
And what span of years might we have been talking about here? From 1969, when you started in the secretarial pool,
yes,
to going to school on the company's dime for 90% of it, to becoming a sales team leader, to having a career, we talking about 20 years?
2001. So 69 to 2000.
All right, 30 years. Yeah, 30 plus.
Yep, 30 plus years, right. So I did the whole thing. I climbed the ladder and just kept working, and then I ended up on my third major corporation I worked for. I got a master's degree with them. So I just used what was available.
You called a halt to that. So you've had 14 years of playing golf and tennis.
Yeah, yeah, but really spiritual pursuit.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah, spiritual pursuit. And I started out, I think I read the first year that I really had time to devote myself to spiritual studies. I think I read 300 books the first year.
Come on.
So I was reading everything I could get.
One a day?
I don't know how I did this. Maybe it was over longer than that. It might have been over 18 months or something, maybe a couple years even. But I just kept thinking that the answer was in the next book. The answer was with the next guru. The answer was at the next workshop. And so I just kept looking and looking.
So you were very parched, and you just needed that water.
Yeah.
My question, and I think it's a question, you never know who might watch this, and my feeling is, if we serve a purpose, is that we reach people who might be fence travelers. They entertain this thought, or the thought keeps rapping on the door, and their life is the way they like it, but they feel like they may be missing something important. The question I think a lot of them have is, what if I entertain this idea that Candace is talking about? What if I fall off the wagon? Is there much chance I'm going to turn away from it and discuss one day? My feeling is that doesn't happen very much. Was the temptation there for it to happen to you?
No, but this is the journey. You know, we forget. So you're going along and everything's fine, and then you step in a spiritual pothole. You know, and we forget who we are. We forget that we're this incredible bright being. And so we get lost again, and we get lost in the muck and the conditioning, and it's okay, you know, it just happens. It's part of the process. And start over again, or just take up where you left off. It's
one of the most daunting things I think I've ever come across is the idea, and Jody and I both followed this for 20, 25 years, a book called A Course in Miracles, where it suggests, in no uncertain terms, you have to begin the process of unlearning everything you've learned for 40, 50, 60 years before you can get to the starting point of acquiring new understanding. Were you able to do that part?
I'm able to see that this is not an intellectual pursuit. And because I'm attracted to intellectual pursuit, it's just my nature, I didn't understand that for a long time. I thought it was about gathering knowledge, and it's not. It's a stepping stone. The knowledge is a big stepping stone sometimes to some people. It's not necessary. But for me, it was extremely necessary to go through what I did as far as the learning.
Say a little bit more about this, because I would guess many people watching this topic for the first time might think that that's all you're talking about is an intellectual search.
I'm not, but I know it sounds that way. I think it's important to have, for me, it was important to have some understanding of how life works. And I had to do it through the intellectual route. In yoga, it's called jnana yoga.
Yep.
And that's just my tendency. There are bhakti yogas.
Devotional path.
Yes, absolutely. Karma yoga, the yoga of action. They're all valid paths. It just, for me, this was the way to go.
Jody has a question.
You said you were searching for the answer, and it might be in the next book, but it sounds as if perhaps all these years, each book, each guru, each workshop was a growth process which got you ready for the final answer.
Absolutely correct. That is so true.
It's an
it was all building blocks.
So you assimilated this information.
Yes.
It changed you.
Yes.
You were ready for the next.
Yes. And I still rely on a lot of the information. I did a deep study on David Hawkins' work, for example.
We did too.
Power versus force. I love that. It was the first time I was able to understand that people operate from different levels of consciousness, if that's what you want to call it. And then I could understand that if somebody is not, if I'm not a match for somebody, they're not a match for me, and their understanding, there's nothing wrong with that. They're just at a different place in life right now, and it's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
So it takes away the sting of judgment.
That's one of the biggest hurdles I can think of to be removed.
Right. Yes, it is.
It's one of our base tendencies to judge ourselves first and everybody around us.
And I like what Thomas Nehrer says about this. He says we're comparative beings. So we're always comparing ourselves in relation to everything, relative to other people, relative to situations, relative to what's held within our memory. And so that's the basis of our judgments.
Candace, can you see why Jody and I have labored so long and hard to get you right where you are, sharing your story? It's everybody's story, and it's not going to have any impact whatsoever on those who don't see it.
Yes.
But it can on not only those who are newcomers to this path, but to people who've been on the path for decades, because you're presenting ideas afresh for people like me to pick up and say, yeah, she's really got a good slant on this approach.
And yet I don't want to leave the impression that I'm arrived. You know what I mean? Like to enlightenment or anything. It's not even relevant to me at this point.
Oh, great.
It's lovely, but it's just, I have never been at a place in my life where many of the barriers are gone. Many of the limitations of thinking are not there anymore. And it's like there just isn't, the boxes are almost gone, you know. And I will still get into a situation, you know, where I'll be thinking like what's appropriate or how would I deal with this person or that. I still do that based on the relevancy of the relationship and what's currently going on. But I've never felt more liberated, more self-confident.
Now, I love James, and he and I are on many of the same pages, and I know firsthand that just because you're married to somebody you love and you think you're on the same page with, couples aren't necessarily always in lockstep. Has he seen the change in you?
Yes, and I think he likes it. He has his own path that he follows, and yet he sees that even as a path. And he subscribes also to the Thomas Nehrer work as well. So, yeah.
Jody, any last questions from you?
Well, I think it's refreshing to hear all this without religious or any path terminology, Because I spent decades being allergic to for an example is I spent decades being allergic to the word God.
Yeah.
And that was problematic. I was able to sort of continue growth by translating the word God into the word love with a capital L. You know, or something like that.
Right.
But
right.
you're telling this story, same story, much the way another Souljourns interviewee did, Nancy Dannison, without religious or even spiritual terminology.
Right.
And I think that's helpful actually to all of us Westerners, and particularly to someone who can benefit from it but has an allergy to the word God or any, or as an example I use that, or an allergy to organized or exclusive paths.
I think you're right. And Jody, what I really see now is that there's a field of love that is all around us, that's through us, it's pervasive. And we don't see it because of these blockages of our conditioning. But it's there, I've experienced it, I know it's there.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't at this point call it up at will.
Mm-hmm.
I wished I could, but I know it's there. I've experienced it enough that I know that it's valid, it's real.
Do you experience that during meditation, Candace, or does this come spontaneously? Or?
I had 3 spontaneous experiences that have convinced me, and you know, there's ways that we know things, right? We know it because there's a trusted source, you know, or through inference, or the most valid way of knowing something is with direct experience. And I've had direct experience, very, very briefly, but enough direct experience to know that there's this complete field of love that when the barriers are down or thinned enough, you experience it.
Well, I'd be derelict in my duties as a former reporter not to ask you to go into more on that. And actually, we talked about it and we had forgotten to until this point. So it's perfect for you to end our conversation, if you don't mind,
I don't mind,
with your direct experience.
All right. So the first thing that happened to me was I was in a corporate situation. And it was a meeting. I had already been on my spiritual path for a little while, and I was starting to read some of those books. And I was attending the Unity Church, and I was open to some new things. And so I went into this meeting in a conference room, and I looked. I'd had a corporate executive that we had words, we were not happy with each other, and another person who was on my same level, not happy with each other. And it was a hostile environment in that everybody was trying to get ahead. You know, it was just a typical corporate situation. And I went into this particular meeting. I sat down. It was about 9 in the morning. And I looked at the end of the conference table, and there was this 2 people that I'd had these discussions with that were not pleasant, and they were glowing.
They were glowing.
They were absolutely stunningly beautiful.
You weren't asleep, you weren't dreaming, you weren't...
It was 9 in the morning, I was drinking coffee. And I looked down at the table, and it took my breath away because they were so beautiful. And I'll start crying because when I think about it, it was the most incredible thing I've ever seen in my life.
And this is a real first person, wasn't a figment of your imagination.
No.
You weren't looking out the window daydreaming.
Had no idea this was going to happen.
And
None.
What did you possibly make of this?
Well, it was like a stage setting in a way, because it was like suddenly everybody turned, and it sounds silly, but it was like suddenly everybody just turned the stage lights on. And I don't remember if there was any sound going on or not, but I could just see these beautiful people glowing. I couldn't make their details of their faces out, but I think this only lasted a few minutes or seconds. And I just felt this incredible warmth all over myself, all over the room. It was amazing love. I don't, there's no word. It's like what you read in spiritual material. There's no word to describe it. But it was just stunning. And then I got frightened. And I woke myself up and I went, oh.
Were you self-conscious that maybe somebody...
Yes, I thought somebody saw me, and I thought I'd done something weird because I wasn't sure how long I had been in this condition or state. And I looked around to make sure nobody, I hadn't done anything strange, and nobody was paying any attention to me, so it didn't matter. But
you didn't make a fool of yourself.
I shook it off, and then I wouldn't even allow myself to think about it the rest of the day because I went on with the meetings. And later that night in my hotel room, I started thinking about, what happened? Because I thought I had had a heart attack. I thought physically I must have had a heart attack. And I look at it now and I think I did have a heart attack, but it was a different kind of heart attack. It was not a physical heart attack. It was
real quickly, did your attitude towards those two individuals change on any level?
Yes. Yes, I knew then that they weren't. What I learned was they were not their personalities. Mm-hmm. They were not. They were just, that was the facade. And I knew that they, at their core being, they were beautiful light. And I couldn't, we still had interactions and we were back on the physical plane interacting again, but from then on I knew. And that's really the incident that spurred my physical, that spurred my quest.
And the old me would suggest that there's lots of people just like me who are very envious, almost jealous of people who have experiences like that. I do see now many on the path who have something similar that goes on that they can't account for.
Right.
And that it's sort of like a little 25-cent reinforcement experience.
Right.
You're on the right path. Here's a bone. I'm tossing.
That's what it was like. It was like, now here's a direction, so now you can go for it.
Yeah. It's been a delightful story. Do you have anything more you want to say in summation? Because I often forget to say that when somebody says, why didn't he ask me about this point?
I think that the key thing here is to work on yourself. It's all a self-made journey. And that it's the looking into this deep, dark conditioning, bringing as much of it to light as possible, and working through that allows those blinders to come off. I don't see any other way to get to it except to go through the muck. Mm-hmm. And when things come up, you take time and you look at it, and you look deeply and see what the conflict is, what's really bothering you. And as Thomas Nehrer says in his work, because he's done it for he said 20-some years, it's a lifelong work, but life gets better and better and better, and relationships get better, beautiful people show up in your life. It's fantastic. It's the most important journey of our whole life. This is it. And we just happen to be experiencing in what we call the life format right now.
We're both very happy for you. The God within bless the God without. Well, however you want to phrase it, because all the terminology gets thrown out the window at this point.
Yeah, there isn't. It's not important.
But one last word. Thanks.
And thank you, Ted.
Thank you so much. It's beautiful.
Thank you. That's why people are attracted to it.
I'm at the point where there's like many people, many things I have to do. I call them duty.